permits, or nope, do whatever they want. Nope.
Welcome all to the Op Tax Committee meeting, August 23rd. We don't have a quorum, so all we're gonna do is just run through some items that we have planned out. So the first thing. How about the roll call? All right, no minutes. Privilege to the floor. Seeing none, we'll move on. Action agenda. Yeah, anything,
We don't want a treasurer.
yeah, we can try to
So I'll just jump right in.
give us some action here.
I'll give you some. I'll make it painless. So does everyone have a copy of what was distributed? And if anyone needs one, I have some here. Perfect. There you go. Just paper. I'll let you look at it. I'm doing well. You do? It is right there. Perfect. That's okay.
Oh, you started fishing, you forgot we did it.
It's part of the agenda. Are you good?
Okay.
Here.
You're.
So that's part of it.
This before this thing?
No,
Here you
well,
go.
2003 got started, but, you know, as far as preparation.
Okay.
Oh, yeah.
So with the help of my fabulous staff and specifically Lisa, we have put together a occupancy tax overview of the law, of the history of the law, when it was enacted to today, and in the last 20 years, any amendments, resolutions. So I'm going to present these changes of the law, the funding structures, the spending plan, and the allocation process. I'm going to identify where we stand in legislation so that the committee and the full board can make some informed decisions going forward. The goal of today is to just set the foundation for discussions going forward into next committee's meeting so that we can review what we currently have to date in regulation, things that we necessarily don't feel should be in there going forward and or should change based on process that has happened in the past, and then review them and hopefully make decisions if need be. And then there'll also be a discussion on the application form process and timing at that meeting as well. So looking at page 2, and I apologize, I didn't number these pages, Jean, I will do that next time. The top of the page is occupancy tax local law. For interest of those in here, I'm going to summarize that which is in red on this page. Part of this is to just I show the history, but the red shows what is enacted and in law. And please keep me honest, because this piece is more of your world and not mine. But really looking at it, we enacted this local law for a 3-year period starting on January 1st, 2004. That was enacted in 2003 for 4% tax. Then we initiated we enacted it for a second 3-year period, again at the 4% in 2006. But I believe later that year, we amended that to remove the term limits and basically enact the law effective until amended, rescinded, or repealed. Then in 2011, they changed the administration tax percentage of the tax from 10% of revenue to 3% of revenue to administer that tax. That is what's currently on regulation. And then again in 2015, there were some amendments it needs to incorporate some New York State law changes, and that addressed the occupancy tax paid by remarketing organizations. Those are Airbnb, VRBO. Those are what remarketer organizations are. Then again, which is current today, local law number 5 of 2018, it incorporates any of the previous local law changes that were made to local law 3 of 2006. And it clarified some definitions, the hotel and motels, and then also added in the short-term vacation rentals, that which allowed us to collect the tax from the short-term rentals. On this particular local law, are there any discussion? Hold the concerns till the next meeting, because it's more about when we're able to make decisions. So going on to the next page is the allocation of the occupancy tax funding. So it appears that this is in what I'm gonna call 4 different lines, 4 different buckets, whatever the terminology you use for funding. It goes under administration, the towns, the county events, and then the reserve. Currently, the administration went from 10% and now is currently at 3%. The towns, as you know, are currently 25%. And then there were a couple of changes along the way that allowed for an initial disbursement. The timing of those disbursements, there was also in 2005 ability to retain the funds that were unspent in 2005, and that was only for that particular year. And then to today, the initial $30,000 for tax revenue is administered or delivered by October 15th annually. And then the remaining of the funds are on June 1st for the following year. And that is a 25% allocation of revenue from prior year. Then go on to the county and events. This also took but I'm going to call a couple of changes along the way. We started at 65% in 2003, then went to 10% of collections in prior year, then to flat dollar amounts from $350 to $250 to $175. Currently in this line, we are at $350,000. I ask that we look at that because that is not what is currently taking place. And it's a good idea to look at the history of it, which I will be bringing forth so everyone can see it and identify what that dollar figure should be and or if it should be a percentage. And then the reserves is probably very familiar in everyone's mind. We just increased that. It started at a $500,000 limit to $1 million in 2014. And this year, I want to say a month or two ago, we upped that limit to 1.5 million. Any questions?
Yeah.
Yes.
This county event flat down, what's the formula for that? How is that determined? Is there any rationale?
It's so right now, I feel like a lot of this is determined based on budget and based on approval of applications. So it's not necessary, right now, it's not in line. We're not in line with the regulations. However, it is my understanding, because at the last board meeting, we identified that I believe in the resolution and or in the presentation of the resolution, it was mentioned that we are outside of these numbers. And that was part of the decision. And I remember that on the ICE Council's presentation, when it was outside the 150 line. I believe that was mentioned at the board meeting for that. So I don't know, in preparing my budget right now, that number's 350.
Right.
In looking at history, specifically this last year, that number is higher. We're about $1 million of that number, excuse me.
And that's
I can tell you right now.
based on what?
That is based on applications that are submitted. Yeah, so that would be your application line in there, and currently we are at almost $1 million of that line item already. That does not include the 3 million in the winter piece.
Kevin, just to answer his question, there is nothing that specifies.
That's what I thought.
Yeah, it was 350. And since then, there's no, that's something that should be discussed. How much of our revenue do we want to allocate?
Right, you kind of say that, I mean.
There's nothing set forth in a resolution. This would be the last thing that we had in a resolution.
And then the reserves are what it is. So any other questions?
Sure.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a comment on administration fees. The treasurer is looking at that now. There's a reevaluation because of a lot of the things they are doing to collect additional occupancy tax from like the short-term rentals and things like that. So they may come back with a request to increase the administrative fees above 3%. Not sure what that'll be yet. So.
And the only comment I'll make is on your question is now it's happening when people come to the committee with a special project and it's worked out there, but I think we're gonna be working on kind of making it a standard somehow this for next, the first of 2024. But right now it's just open, like Lisa said, and money spent sometimes more on emotion than it is on necessity. That's my comment.
Thank you.
Okay,
You're
Heather, go ahead. I'm
Thank
sorry.
you. So then we look at the next page for the spending plan. This is part of the process, but it's, it's done in resolution. And each year it's based on a certain amount divided up amongst towns, cities, and villages. It's been about the same, about a $400,000 mark throughout the years. Except for 2020 during the pandemic, monies were awarded, then monies were pulled back from various pieces. But this is pretty much explanatory in funding dollars and done through resolution. There isn't a formula format. It's yearly, it's annually. So there's nothing stating for 2020, 2024, 25, 26. It's just adopted each year. But a good way to see, again, the flow of the funding. Any questions? And then the final page is probably a page we should spend a lot of time on in next committee meeting. More of a workshop is this application process. This process is looked at in 3 different, what I'm going to call areas. We've got the funding criteria, the application form, and then the scoring criteria. Currently, we have funding criteria as the general rule. One-day events should be addressed at the local level, the town, the village, and the city. That was adopted in 2005. And again, that year, requests should not exceed the 50,000. Again, I go back to the prior board meeting where it was addressed with some of an application being over that and identifying that. We then go into 2008 where they added some additional expenses to the attraction to be included. Then we go into the application due date, which is November 1st for 100% of the funds due in December. That was adopted in 2011. So I believe we should be looking at this as well, because right now we're still awarding throughout the year. And maybe that's something we might want to do or not, but it's just options I want to point out there that we kind of line it, or we leave it to whatever you prefer, but a little bit more direction on when we should get them in, how we should process them. And then the last here in the funding criteria, it was set that the contracts are written and approved by the county attorney. I didn't see in a lot of the regulations why this came about. So some of this, you might wonder, well, who wrote the contracts before? I would probably assume that the county attorney was doing it. But again, not being here and not recognizing that, but it is that they do it and they are doing it. So, and they write at least 50 of them for octax. Please go.
So before 2021, the board adopted a form contract,
Okay, thank you.
and we typically, our office would input the correct numbers and information into those blanks, and those would be passed as is. Now, I think with the type of events and the amount of money going to these events, they're getting a little bit more complicated where we can't just use a form. So I think that's sort of the reason for the change.
Yeah, and there is a lot of the county attorney's involvement.
Mr. McGowan, you have your hand?
Yes, thank you. Really great, but this maybe go back to the administration fee. Is that the attorneys, added load or added load case for doing up these contracts? We might want to look in that, might help out the attorney's budget a little too. So, thank you.
That's a great.
This is really good.
It is all treasures of this.
That's our treasure.
All treasure
It is
at this point, but you're saying,
Suggesting.
look at an opportunity to help their funds as well.
Well, all part of the administration fees, so.
I think we could look at that.
Thank you. So then moving on to the application form, again, I'm just gonna be very brief on this. It did take, a couple of changes along the way. And a lot of it could have been done to situational basis, things that have happened, making sure that the right insurances are included, so on and so forth. Right now, the most recent application, again, which I would like to take a look at, and our department will look at it, kind of identify some questions, concerns, and then have the committee really review it. But currently, this was adopted in 2021 with a new application and 2 rounds of awarding. One for applications due in October that are for annual and seasonal, and then one for off-peak seasonal awards that are due in January. And then the last piece is scoring criteria. This is an area that I really would love to take a look at and have a larger conversation about, because this piece is not being done. But I've had some options and ideas that we can discuss at the later time. But currently in 2021, at the same time that the revised occupancy tax application was presented, also was a new rating criteria and scoring sheet for both the events and the events, as well as a municipality supplemental funding evaluation. That's those additional dollars that you apply via the municipalities apply via a grant for events that they're running in their communities. Any questions on the application process or anything in front of you? I look forward to a very entertaining, fun, and engaging committee meeting next time, as I think it will allow us to provide the community with a better direction on the application process, but also the funding criteria, so that I can then prepare a very good budget for you all. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ed. All right, Mike Swan's not here for his report. And you already gave us the overview and application. That's it. I'll open to the public. Any questions? Yeah.
How much should be allocated? I mean, I think it needs to be understood that the tourism budget comes out of this money too. I think, that's not, we talk mostly about events, but it doesn't say that we fund our tourism department out of that. And I'm just curious. So 1-day events you want funded by the community, that it was set up that way?
It was set up that way.
There was, in the resolution, it said except for, certain or extra consideration by the committee. So you had the latitude to approve something, but for the most part, they should have been just 1-day events. And we did do Wing Fest this year, which was 1-day event in Glens Falls. I wouldn't do it again. But it wasn't that profitable.
The other thing is the 25% that goes to communities, it's pretty hefty sum right now. For some of the communities.
Yes.
I won't say all the communities, but.
Yeah. It can all be changed.
And we're looking into a few of those things. We're gonna look into a few of those changes.
It could be a lot of,
2024.
could be a lot of money to certain communities that have the rooms. But then, you know, we still send a lot of the events down to this committee for extra money.
And those are all important pieces of what I'm gonna call a puzzle.
Yeah.
That we need to sort of put together so that it can better guide the budget. As well as future spending, you know. We have the ability to create a nice roadmap for what the requirements are going forward. And what's gonna really impact tourism and create more heads and beds and people here spending money on both sales tax and occupancy tax.
And when that all comes out from this group, definitely chairman and administrator get a look at it to make an opinion of it also. All right, anything else from the public? Guess we'll have a motion to adjourn.
Can't motion.
Oh, you can. Thank you all for coming. Thank